Hello and welcome to podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so you should check out Linode. With private networking, shared block storage, node balancers, and a 40 gigabit network, all controlled by a brand new API, you get everything you need to scale. Go to podcastinit.com/Linode to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And to get worry-free releases, download GoCD, the open-source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. You can use their pipeline modeling and value stream map to build, control, and monitor every step from commit to deployment in one place. Go to podcastinit.com/GoCD to learn more about their professional support services and enterprise add-ons. And visit podcastinit.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, and read the show notes. Your host as usual is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Eric Schles about how to get involved with social justice causes as an engineer. So Eric, could you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. So I'm Eric. I've been doing data science and engineering for probably like the last 7 or 8 years. I've been interested in social justice for a long time, and I've been very lucky in my opportunities. I've gotten to work in local government, within law enforcement, at the DA's office. I've worked as a contractor for the New York Police Department, as well as other police departments. I've gotten to work with some DA's offices all over the country. I've gotten to work in the federal government. I was hired by the Obama White House, and I got to work for the United States Digital Service, as well as AT&F, which are 2 agencies Obama started. And I've helped out with a ton of projects, and I just generally love helping people and writing code that makes people's lives better.
All right. And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yeah, so I took the MIT OpenCourseWare course on Python and just kind of fell in love. So I had started off using SAS, and then I moved over to R back when I was doing economics, because those are standard tools for that space. And then I took a machine learning class, and I was like, oh my goodness, machine learning is the next thing. I need to learn everything about it. And all the data mining books were coming from a computer science perspective, so I was like, okay, I need to study computer science. And then I just Googled around for the basic computer science book, or computer science thing, because I decided to go for grad school at NYU in computer science after finishing out a bunch of stuff. And the Python intro class was the first thing that came up, and it was amazing. It was well taught. It was super well structured. And from that point on, I've fallen in love. And it's always been a love-love relationship with Python, especially having worked in other languages. And yeah, if you look at my GitHub, it's pretty clear that Python is my favorite thing in the world as far as programming languages go.
So, as we mentioned, the main topic that we're here to discuss is ways that as engineers we can create value and help out with various real-world issues and social justice causes. So I'm wondering if you can just enumerate some of the ways that we can use our skills and our expertise to provide value to different organizations or groups who are working in that type of space.
Yeah, so this is a really great question, and I'm going to attack it from a couple of different ways. So the first thing I'll do is actually talk through some specific examples of things that I've done. And then I'll talk through the ways that you can sort of sell yourself as someone who wants to do social justice work as an engineer. And then the last thing I'll do is talk about some other people's examples that I don't know as well, so I'll be a little bit briefer there. So the examples that come mostly to mind are around applying software engineering best practice to just really a problem. Because at the end of the day, software engineering is as much about process as it is about actually writing code. And the processes for doing work in the software engineering space are super good. Version control is an amazing innovation, and just having the ability to use GitHub within an organization allows you to encapsulate and codify and put all your knowledge base in one central place that can be shared across an entire organization, is easy to get access to, and requires no barriers to entry. And then I really think that agile processes can be super helpful. So now I'll talk through those are some high-level process things, and I'll talk through some specific examples. So my first job out of grad school was working for the DA's office in New York, Manhattan DA's office. And there we had this one process for, so without going into too much detail, I worked in the anti-trafficking space, and so when we would start looking into a case about a given trafficker, what we would do is we subpoena for all these records. And one of the things we would subpoena for is their banking information to figure out if they were doing money laundering, because money laundering is the number one way that you find, catch, and put away traffickers. And so we would get all these picture PDFs, just Actually, it would be more like pieces of paper, so boxes and boxes of pieces of paper. And then these poor analysts would have to, scan these documents in, and so they'd be picture PDFs, and they'd have to OCR them, and then they would manually go through and turn all of that information into CSVs. And so the first thing I did was I wrote a super simple web interface, and I created a little parser that would take a PDF, OCR it automatically, and then it would strip out the information that we cared about. I don't want to go into too much detail about what we cared about. That's I've got plenty of talks on that if you're interested. Go check those out. But basically, automating that process took a process that took, months to sometimes years and turned it into minutes. I mean, yeah, they still have to scan in all the pieces of paper, but you can do that over the course of maybe 2 days. The hard part is translating all the information and just doing the data entry stuff. Also, doing the data entry this way, the error rate, it meant that the analyst could focus on actually catching the bad guys. And so it frees up a ton of time. The second example I'll bring up is some work that I did for the federal government. And so when I worked for the federal government, one of the things that we ended up doing is people would use these Excel documents. And Excel is prolific in the federal government. In the local government, PDFs are prolific. In the federal government, Excel documents are. So they're a little bit further along. And so these Excel documents, they would just have functions embedded in them. And it was extremely hard to be able to understand what was going on in an Excel document, whether the calculations were correct, all this other stuff. And so I wrote a simple tool that would take these Excel documents, put them into a database, gather all the data from all the different Excel documents, and then put them together. And this saved because this guy was running this stuff manually, this saved about, I don't even know how many hours, just a ton of hours over time. The point here, though, so generalizing out, usually people in the government space or in the specific set of the social justice space, which does generalize, by the way, to a lot of the problems that happen across the federal space, across nonprofits, and across local government, which is where the social justice work is happening, it's about ETL. It's about taking something that should be automated and automating it. So usually, and I talk about this in a lot more detail in other talks, but basically it's about going from a point where things are done in a manual way to automating away essentially the boring stuff. So Python is really great for that. High-level software engineering is great for that. So now that I've talked through some case examples of the types of work that are usually low-hanging fruit and easy to automate, and there's lots of good tools and processes for doing this. Oh, also, if you want to do this, there's a third class of things that are typically associated with this, and that's web scraping. So a lot of times you'll have a lot of silos across government, but because of various mandates, they have to put things on the internet or on the web or in a downloadable form, but these agencies internally won't talk to each other, so you can just scrape the stuff from the internet, especially in the federal space, and then actually make the data sets locally for yourself. So I recommend Thomas Levine's blog. He's got a lot of great resources on how to do web scraping and other stuff. I also will put together a few links of some various web scraping things after the podcast if you all are interested, because he's been rewriting his blog recently, so it may or may not be available still. In any event, and I have a talk on parsing PDFs that I can also send you, as well as some tools that I wrote that do this. Okay, so now generalizing and abstracting out. So once you have these sort of class of things that can be helpful and are easy to explain to people, so not the sophisticated machine learning, not the user research and design stuff, that takes a lot more industry buy-in, a lot of more leadership buy-in and other stuff. The next thing to do is just honestly start by building one of these tools, or maybe even all three, and then giving talks on it for that domain area. Maybe you found a data set on the internet somewhere and you cleaned it and then you want to share it back with that agency. Go give talks at a conference. I bet you, and this is the crazy part, someone will know someone at that agency and they'll be able to introduce you, and then you can develop a working relationship. You can either get hired by them or you can work pro bono. And these are two great ways. And sometimes you can just reach out and people will be more receptive. I found that in the federal space, you tend to have to know someone. So usually getting to that connection, so where you can actually do the work, takes a while. But in the nonprofit space, you can usually just reach out to the head of the nonprofit and just be like, hey, I built this tool for the problem that you're kind of working on. I'd love to just give it to you for free and let your team run with it. So usually once you've built the tool, it may or may not be the right thing, and you have to do some design, some research, build it to their specifications and their needs. So usually it's best to do this work in a team setting. And then you can take that tool or that set of tooling and just give it to everyone in that space, and then they can automate their processes and honestly save themselves money and time. Most of these organizations don't understand free and open source software. They don't understand best practice. And so giving them a little bit of that, as well as figuring out how to do handoff in a reasonable way, are like the keys to success here. And you can make a ton of impact just by doing like the basic industry standard type of things and just standard software engineering. I know that sounds a little boring, but like it means that you probably already have the skills to be super helpful without having to like go and research a ton about that specific organization and that specific problem domain. You can just go and be impactful. And honestly, it doesn't take very much. Like these people don't need like all the bells and whistles and all the optimizations and all of the, like it's not, you can build these really simple high level products and then deliver a ton of value. Another or last thing that I'll touch on actually that I forgot about, so search is something that doesn't exist across a lot of these things. So just bringing data together and being able to make it searchable is also a huge value add. So if you can put things in Elasticsearch, then that just like is a game changer for everybody. There was a third thing I was going to discuss. Oh yeah, other people's work. So this will be the last thing. So if you're a user researcher or something, but you're in the tech space, you can also help out too. When I was with the White House, a ton of user researchers would go and just like figure out when people were working on the same problem and then bring all that stuff together. So that's like a good example of some other cases where things can be done in a more obvious way. And then project managers just applying like general project process in a standard way can be super helpful to a lot of these organizations because they don't know how to manage software teams and they don't know how to manage automated systems most of the time. Or if they do, their skills are degraded over years or something. That, not to say that these people are not brilliant or capable. They're all really smart. It's just that government moves a lot slower, and so they haven't been able to keep up with all the technical revolutions that have happened in the private sector.
Yeah, as technologists, it's often easy to forget about how some of the simplest tooling that we use in our day-to-day is completely revolutionary for somebody who doesn't work in the space and who is used to doing those manual processes. And also one thing that I forgot to call out when we first started the show is that this is actually your second time being on the podcast. And so if anybody is interested in hearing more about the work you're doing with the New York District Attorney's Office, then I'll add a link to the show notes for that episode as well.
That would be great. Yeah, that was a super fun podcast. I really enjoyed it.
And going back to your point too about version control, as engineers, we're used to using it in the context of managing our software, but there's also a lot of value to be had in terms of just managing arbitrary text documents or even PDFs, just so that you can have even just an audit log. So it's an easy way for people to just, well, comparatively easy to just keep track of changes that are happening in documents. Even if you're not able to maybe go into GitHub and view the diff directly, you at least have a way of going back in time to compare, even Excel documents or PDFs.
That's absolutely right. And being able to do that type of thing is really, really hard for a lot of these organizations, especially if they're using, there are a lot of great proprietary tools that, or I guess GitHub is technically a proprietary tool. There are lots of tools that can do this well, but like a generalized version control system is just going to do it like in so much better in such a centralized way. Like, yeah, you can definitely treat it as code, but like if you treat it as just like work product, then being able to just understand what your institutional knowledge is and not having it disappear when someone leaves or quits or gets fired or dies, you're just going to be more sustainable as an organization.
And two, it goes back to the whole 80-20 rule of 20% of the effort that you put in is going to produce 80% of the value necessary to make it easier for people to do their work and be more efficient so that they can free up time spent doing manual tasks for more value add projects that they can do with their time.
Absolutely. That is 100% a thing. Yeah, I think like another place, like just to call it out, versions of Excel documents are a really big deal. And like there's Google has like a versioning system for Excel documents, but like I think it doesn't, I don't want to say it's lacking because it's not lacking. It's a great product, but like it's a lot easier to do version control in a thing like GitHub or Git, where you can just like see the previous versions in a really obvious way. And I'm not trying to bash them. They do a lot of great work and it's an awesome tool, and you can do a lot of crazy stuff in Google like Excel documents that you can't do, or Google spreadsheets that you can't do in regular Excel documents that are local. But yeah, I think having the ability to version control these things in an obvious way is super important. It's added a ton of value.
And so on the topic of these small projects or even just raising awareness of tools that we take for granted to make people's jobs easier, Are there any particular types of projects or tools that you have found to provide the most value compared to the amount of effort required to get it up and running?
I feel like Elasticsearch definitely provides like a ton of value. GitHub provides a ton of value. Trello is like a godsend. Like, I don't mean to like be, pimping people's like stuff or whatever, but like Trello is so easy to use, and like it's just so easy to explain Scrum to people when you're just like, oh, there are cards that you move around, and then you don't have to communicate about every single task someone's working on, and you just kind of know. And like anything that really is going to be a conversation piece is going to be helpful. And Trello is just my personal favorite version of this. I think those make things a lot easier. I mean, incorporating Python into the stack is going to make things better because some of these shops will still be using like older languages that aren't as good. Like I've seen examples of Fortran and assembly still in some places. I've seen weird proprietary languages that I don't even remember like the names of in some of these places, and they're crazy, and it's like, why aren't you using standard tools? I mean, like, and that really is just going to come down to some people's flavors and stuff. But let me think if there's anything else. Yeah, I think that's a good small list. There's definitely far more of these things, but I think something in each of those categories, like something that makes it easy to understand what your data is doing, sort of like dashboarding thing, a search tool, a process management tool, and a version control tool is kind of like the small representative set that you need as a basis.
And with Python in particular, because of the fact that the syntax is generally very easy for people to pick up, even for people who aren't necessarily technical, and there are a lot of useful resources describing how to use it just as a scripting language to tie things together and get things done quickly. I think that makes it a viable option for introducing into an organization, building these tools in Python, so that people who have a desire to go in and maybe modify or tweak certain aspects of it still have the possibility of doing that, versus if you were to build things in C or Haskell or some of these more complex languages.
Absolutely. I mean, just like the number of packages and the community that exists in the Python landscape makes it sort of like a de facto standard if you have limited time and resources and you need to write something both quickly and inexpensively. Also, it's such a accessible language that you can usually like get someone, like you said, up to speed really fast. So it's I think it is like the most viable option for most of these smaller organizations, and even some of the larger ones, that like need the help.
And so in terms of picking where you spend your time or the types of organizations or causes that you want to get involved in, do you have any advice for picking out an organization or group that will be able to benefit the most from your technical expertise and provide the most real-world value?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because there's some level of subjectiveness here. So I personally, either intelligently or in some ways masochistically, always like to go where people's lives are on the line when I'm choosing a social justice project. So I'll try to work with either survivors of trafficking or people that are dealing with homelessness issues or both. Whenever there's, I try to put my effort personally into places where I know that I'm going to be adding value and that it's important that things be correct, because, my time is a limited resource. I'm not going to live forever, nor do I have an unlimited number of hours in my day. And so I want to be helping where the help is going to translate into real value. That being said, there's actually a lot of upstream processes and things that stop people from ending up in a situation where their lives are on the line, and only working on that part of the problem doesn't completely fix things. Then you're always in firefighting mode, because it's intuitive. It makes sense. It's like, if this gets better, then fewer people will die, or their lives will be significantly of a higher quality. But actually, it's really usually a death of 1,000 cuts is how you end up in that bad situation in the first place. So, I think mentorship organizations, like in New York City, there's a thing called iMentor. I don't know if it exists elsewhere. I imagine it does. All the various clubs for kids and things where you can receive mentorship. Those add so much value to a lot of these people's lives so that they don't end up in a bad situation in the first place. So I think mentorship is one of the places that honestly gets some help but could always use more. I think disaster relief is going to be key for the next century, and it's going to become increasingly a problem. So, just as a problem area, I think it's important to work on that. The energy space has always been exciting to me, and I think it's something I don't spend enough time on, but figuring out how to fix sort of like archaic processes in the energy space is really interesting. But generally speaking, you want an organization that's well functioning, that's going to be capable of taking the help that you give. Like, you can go to organizations that are best in breed in some sense, right? And they're like really good at their problem area and domain expertise. Maybe they have a lot of clout, but don't necessarily have a technical footprint or any appetite for technology, and you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work with those organizations. It just means that it's going to be a harder sell, and you're going to have to prove more value at every turn, and there's going to be a lot more teaching. So it really is this value proposition of how much time do you want to spend, how much time do you actually have that you can spend given other constraints on your time, be that family, friends, work, whatever, and then budgeting appropriately, or finding a team that can distribute that work. You can distribute that work across. So when you're choosing your project, the key is you want to really provide value for whatever client or organization you're going to be working with. And so if you don't have the time and resources, then you're going to end up wasting their time, you're going to waste your time, and nothing's going to get done. So making sure that you can be successful before you move into a new project or start working with a new client is always important. But the way you figure that out is through this discovery. Like, I would say just reach out to everyone who's working in the space that you're interested in, and through conversation and starting that work, you should decide whether or not it makes sense from both perspectives to work on this, or if there's a resource thing, or how to communicate out, when changes need to be made or whatever. And then allowing yourself to fail fast. Like, I've tried to have collaborations with many, many, many institutions over the years, and it hasn't always worked out. Sometimes it works out great and it's amazing, and sometimes it does not work out at all. And being honest about the failures is important, right? So other people don't make the same mistakes. And so, I'm not going to call out names, but I'll just say that being okay with failing fast is okay, right? Like, if you come into it trying to help people and you don't end up being able to accomplish that, freeing up the resources that were spent on the conversations you're having with that organization as fast as possible is really important if you find out that there's just not going to be a fit and it's not going to be possible. So good signs to look for. So signs of success. If they already have any technologists on board, they have a technical team, even if it's just IT people, someone that you can talk to who's technical, who can carry the torch forward internally in the organization, and also can explain things to the managers because they were working there full time. So really, this is kind of like somewhat staff augmentation, somewhat just trying to be helpful. And then, or an extreme appetite from the organization to grow in this direction. So this can either, for local government, can either be like a mayoral initiative or something else, or like maybe they throw a hackathon and you meet them through that. So there's social justice hackathons in a lot of places, and if you can get access to one of those, that's usually a pretty strong indicator that the organization wants to move in a more technical direction. Then just follow up a ton, and that can lead to a ton of value added, because they're already seeking it out, they're already primed for this, and then they're ready to have a successful collaboration. That's worked out very well. If they have technologists on board, that usually means that things are going to go well, or at least there's the opportunity for things to go well. Doesn't always mean that. And then if an organization has just gotten a ton of funding. So like a lot of organizations that work on news literacy have gotten a ton of money since Trump was elected, and so working with them can be very effective nowadays. But basically this is a little bit fad driven, but basically where people throw their money does determine what kind of resources they're going to have available to them. So as their staff grows, you can contribute more time because there's more resources available and stuff. And then usually technical requirements are more likely needed, right? Like, so if you've got more problems to solve because you've got more money, you're working on something bigger, then it's more likely you're going to do something to be automated.
And also that type of opportunity is a good way to take advantage of the increased attention so that you can build something that will be more long lasting and provide value after that attention starts to fade.
Yeah, so the key is, like, not everyone will throw money at a problem forever. And so in lieu of people leaving to go work on the next sexy thing, right, while they still have the resources, you build up that automation, and then it's okay if people leave. This isn't replacing jobs. It's just allowing jobs to not be needed at such a high quantity when volume goes away. That's exactly right. And so the company or organization can continue to do the good work that it's doing already.
And a lot of the tools and systems that get built for various nonprofits or organizations focused on social justice or organizations that are helping to bring about effective change in the world will often require some measure of data being fed into the system to be able to provide useful outputs. So I'm wondering if you have any advice on methods that you can use for identifying or locating or collecting that information to be able to supply that information into these products.
Yeah, so this is sort of at the key or the center of a lot of data science for good work. This is like the fundamental question that I think everyone's figuring out. Now, I obviously have an answer. Other organizations will have different answers. So if you hear something different elsewhere, we just haven't all agreed that this is necessarily the right thing. So I'll talk through some of the ways that I think about this, and then I'll talk through what I've seen other organizations do that try to be helpful in the space. And you can sort of pick and choose what you think is best for you. So, okay, so when you're dealing, so there's really two, so you talked about two things. You talked about public and you talked about nonprofit. So let's talk about government data sources and things, and then let's talk about the nonprofit space and the data that's useful for them. Within the public sector, usually it's being able to bring together other organizations within that same local or maybe even state or national level equivalent. So I'll be specific. So let's say that we're dealing with the Department of Education, but they need housing data. Now, within New York City, for instance, there's this mandate where everyone needs to have open data, access to all their data sets, anonymized, of course, by some deadline. I don't remember what it is or if it's passed or if it's been accomplished yet already. But basically the point is that they want to have folks have access to government data because they're citizens, right? Or they've paid taxes for that work to be done. And so opening up that data means that the citizenry can actually take charge of their own data, do some statistical analysis or whatever. But also it's a natural mechanism for government agencies to talk to each other. So some of the tasks that revolve around these sort of open data initiatives that you can do as a citizen, developer, or data scientist involve, so first and foremost, cleaning the data and then handing it back to the agency. A lot of agencies have no idea what clean data looks like. They've never done it before. They don't really understand how data science works. They just I just use this Excel document, whatever. And that's kind of it. And so being able to clean and structure the data appropriately, if it's just free-form text, which they sometimes will just drop into CSVs, or maybe there's a ton of missing values, maybe there's a ton of columns that aren't well labeled, so creating a data dictionary for these folks, being able to normalize things or regularize things if sometimes addresses will be put in multiple ways, and creating a normalized way that addresses get put in your data set can be a huge value add to these organizations, because then they don't just go from releasing this data set, they're oh, well, now I actually understand what's in my data because now I can search for this one street. Oh my God. Right? So and then, that can lead to a ton of insights just doing that data cleaning for them. Not very sexy though. The next step is usually bringing that data together. So maybe if you're at the Department of Ed, going back to that case, and you need housing data, and maybe you need public works data, maybe you need parks data, bringing all it together into one data set that the Department of Ed might be able to use to figure out when likely truancies are happening, or I don't know, any number of things can be really, really cool. And creating a unified data set that does all the sort of integration work for them can be super valuable. Now, as you can guess where I'm kind of going with this, the next step is to do actual analysis. So just starting with exploratory data analysis, you do that, people will get so excited. They'll be oh my God, look at that graph you made. It's got all the points. This is crazy. Because most of these data sets, right, they're either so big because they're over years, or they're so messy that they have no way of getting actual value out of these things. But if you can do actual, even exploratory data analysis, or in some cases modeling, either a classification or regression analysis, or some time series thing, or some geospatial thing, or whatever, if you can do some analysis on this data set and actually show that it provides real value, that are key questions that people actually care about, then they're going to, one, take it far more seriously in the future, and then they'll be able to make better decisions, which is the point. A lot of local government agencies do not have the resources internally to do a lot of this stuff. And the problem is when they pay contractors to do work is that the contractors provide usually a specific service that they specialize in, and they're not looking to provide value in a general way. They're looking to provide products. This way they can scale out the amount of money that they get. And so they'll solve a specific use case, and maybe they'll include a few data sets, but they're not really looking to answer interesting questions or help you think of new things that can, because they're being paid for a specific service, they don't want to take on too much work, et cetera, they're resource constrained, all of these reasons. So, really the best way to add value to local government is from the citizens. And honestly, probably the citizens care more about this, right? Like, if you really want to understand why a specific thing is happening, then you can add a ton of value just by bringing a bunch of data sources together and starting them on the path of doing data analysis. So I'll give like a really specific example or a specific use case of something that I did is we were looking at truancy rates across local government. And it turns out that truancy gets split out amongst a whole bunch of metrics, and there's like specific things that you can look for. Anyway, long story short, they were reporting truancy about once a month, and that wasn't enough to predict what truancy rates would be in the future. And so what I did is I just did like this super dumb time series analysis where I was like, oh, if you interpolate and like triple the data points, then you can actually build a predictive model. And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. We can totally have people report more often, then we'll have the actual numbers instead of having to do this interpolation. And I was like, great, there you go. And so this is like a specific example of how I brought, like, I didn't even use alternative data sources. I just had one data source and I brought it together, and that was all it took. And it had a ton of value for the organization in like a really short order. And that was just like at a hackathon. But speaking more generally, like whenever you can bring public data and just provide like some specific value to it, then it's going to make these people's lives better in a way that they probably even thought about. Plus, fresh pair of eyes is always good on data problems. So now that we've talked about public sector things at the local level, federal's a little trickier. Federal people like definitely are very collaborative, but it's, most of them are in DC, so it's kind of hard to get them to like come out to your specific town. If you live in DC, there's a ton of stuff to do. If you don't, then it's kind of tough. But talking about moving over to the nonprofit space, usually you're going to want to scrape either government data because that's usually the best place to find information about a thing, or you'll want to scrape like competitor data sources on like a specific domain area and just try to bring all that together, and then you share it out to all the organizations. So not really competitors in the nonprofit space, but really just like about having information sharing, because a lot of these nonprofits are extremely siloed. They sometimes they'll talk to each other, and there's some specific sub cases where the organizations are extremely collaborative, but most of the time these organizations do not talk to each other, and they just solve these really niche problems. And that's fine because everyone deserves and needs like a ton of help, but like if you can't learn lessons from other people in the space, it becomes a real challenge. And so just being able to break down those silos can add a ton of value just by scraping their open website, maybe their initiatives, their goals, all that stuff. So those are the two ways that I really see. And then, you just go through the standard workflows again. So one of them, you're scraping CSVs. The other one, you're probably scraping HTML. Both ways, you're pretty much just like pulling in a bunch of data, just to generalize out. You're pulling in a bunch of data, and then you're pretty much just like showing them what that data can be useful for, and then that's how you're able to provide value for a lot of these organizations from a data feeding perspective.
And when you are building these projects or introducing these new practices to various organizations, are there any particular design factors that you should be considering when you're building these projects or teaching people about these things, particularly given the fact that once you're done with a given task, you're likely to move on and they'll be left without the assistance of an experienced engineer to be able to keep these things running and maintain the momentum?
So this is the most important problem for people that work in the social justice space on the weekends or nights. And thank you for for asking me this question. I think it's the most important one. So I think I have a process that works pretty well. Maybe there are other people that have better processes. I'm sure there are, but I'm reasonably happy at this point with the process that I have for doing this. And I'm going to walk through it step by step. I think this is the hardest thing to figure out though for folks. But anyway, so let's walk through it. Okay. So I'm going to talk at a high level about the individual steps. Then I'm going to go through into each node and talk through all of those. But first I'll start with the general highest level possible thesis for working in this space. It's about handoff. It's about building technical capacity at the organization so that you can move on, because you're not going to work with any given social justice organization forever. There's a ton of reasons for this. But it's just, some relationships will last a long time, but it's not sustainable to think that you're always going to be around or on call, especially if you're not getting. And so just being very upfront about it, like you've got to expect that handoff is coming. So let's walk through the specific steps now, let's walk through the high level notes. So the first one is project calling and preparation. The second stage is software development and like updates and communication. And the third stage is handoff. Now, within the first stage, what you're going to want to do is you're going to just really have a conversation with the people that you're building this new thing for. You're going to either talk to them because you already built something and you're going to dispel the preconceived notions that you have and be like, okay, is this actually useful for you? If not, what should we actually be building? And then you're going to teach them. You're going to give them like a Trello board. This is where Trello usually comes in for me, or some sort of Scrum management tool. And you're going to write out features and you're going to write out timelines and you're going to write out schedules, not like in a specific way, not in a waterfall-y, like let's design this whole system before we build it, but in just like a high level, these are the sorts of things that you should expect to be in the product and really getting them familiar with the vocabulary of what you're going to be building. You don't establish hard deadlines. You don't establish hard timelines. You establish sort of like loosey-goosey things, and you have to be very upfront with them about it. Be like, this is not going to be done in 2 weeks. I have no idea how long it's going to take right now. Right now, we're just trying to establish how long it typically takes to do these things, and give you a sense of like what's possible, what's feasible, what requires more resources, all of this sort of stuff, and just giving them a sense of how project management kind of works. Then, once you started to talk through some of the high-level ideas, some of the essentially like the product board, you could say, for the product, and then you've broken out some really high level features. Then what you do next is you start actually developing things. Now, this is probably the most important thing. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. And at the first stage, you prepare them saying, and at some point we're going to hand this off. So you should either have a contractor on hand, or you should hire a software engineer, or you need to, have like some contractor firm that's going to maintain this system once I move on, or the team that I'm working. So you set the expectation of handoff up front, so it's very clear to them that it's not going to be forever. Then when you're actually building it, I think that what I've been doing is I work with one colleague, and I work for a time-bound amount of time. For me, 2 hours is ideal. It's usually on a Sunday because you need Saturdays to recover from the work week. Do not do it during the work week. That is a recipe for failure. I can't do it on Saturdays personally. Maybe other people can, but like if I code 6 days in a row, I die. I just can't do it. So Sundays are when I work with my coworker or my colleague, and we do things for 2 hours a week, and we get as far as we get. Some weeks we make a ton of progress. Some weeks we cover almost no ground, and it's extremely variable. And that's fine, because at the end of the day, you're providing a volunteer service, and so it's okay if things take longer. The key is after you've done the work. So there's two keys here. One is after you've done the work, make sure you communicate it out and be like, okay, here's the status, here's the update, here's what we did this week, and here's what we're going to work on next week. And this gives them an opportunity to say, no, don't do this other thing next week. Do this other thing or whatever. But it furthers the conversation and shows that you're keeping up. And then the other thing is, I think it's important to pair on everything you do, because you're going to burn out. So 1 week you're programming, 1 week you're just there as like moral support and to answer and to like, talk through problems and basically just be a rubber duck. Now, this is not efficient from a time perspective in terms of like you're literally doing 2 engineers to do one job, but it's the only way you're going to not burn out on the specific project or product or thing you're working on. Because burnout is real in the social justice and volunteer space. And it's very easy to happen. I've burned out so many projects. And so this is the only way I've been able to find to make it sustainable, especially given the rigors of how hard it is to be a software engineer. So once you've established that, and so, usually pairs of people will work together for like whatever. And then you have one core person who's going to act as sort of like the lead, or maybe a team of like 3 or 4 people at most who are going to act as the leads and communicate directly with the clients. So this way, people doing the line tasks don't have to worry about, client interfacing. Also, clients can only handle, or nonprofits can only handle, or really anyone can only really handle working with like a couple people at a time, and they don't want to see like a ton of new faces all the time. It just makes things too complicated for them. And so establishing a couple of core people that are going to be on the product from start to finish creates a seamless experience. And then as developers roll on and off as they have time, it's not as big a deal. And then the nonprofit or the local government agency doesn't lose faith in the project overall because they're just consistently seeing the same person, maybe like once a week or whatever. Then the last phase is handoff. So this is where you should be documenting throughout. Good documentation is key, but this is the phase where you're handing over the documentation. You explain everything that's in the documentation to the contractor if you haven't been already. Honestly, really, you should be like explaining things, and you should be working with them on the product board, on the Trello boards every single week. You shouldn't just like go off into a corner and then come back in 3 months with something. You should talk, like, if you're not talking to them once or twice a week, then chances are, or maybe once every 2 weeks for certain organizations, you're not going to really be providing value. And then once you've done all that, then you can move on to this handoff phase where you help them, vet and find contractors to take over the work, or vet and find software engineers. So you teach them how to hire for that specific skill set. And, you can usually get pretty decent people because they just want to do the work. And, you've already provided a ton of value. So you've created that culture where software engineering is seen as a valuable thing internally. Then they don't have to pay as much for contractors usually. They'll be able to get the best value add possible. There's a ton of reasons to do this. And so that's really, I think, like the right way to engage with these kinds of organizations and how to do the best practice. And this is like the typical like, this is how you work if you're a contractor and you're doing consulting things for a larger organization. But like it works super well for these nonprofits, and it's really just, it's about hand-holding a lot more, but it's the same fundamental idea, country in the world.
And I know that for people who are interested in finding organizations to volunteer with or finding topic areas that they can contribute to, I know that you have a list that you have shown in some of your talks, so I'll add links to that in the show notes. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow the work that you're up to, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And so with that, I'll move us into the picks. And this week, I'm going to keep it simple and say shoes without laces, because being able to slip your shoes on and off is awesome. And so now I'll pass it on to you, Eric. Do you have any other picks for us this week?
So we hung out at Open Data Science Conference. If you haven't checked out Cat Boost, which is just the coolest package in the world, please do so. It is amazing. I got to meet one of the core engineers, this woman, Anna, at the conference. And it is just such an amazing tool. I've used it in past jobs, and it got better performance than some of the some of the other really amazing packages, just because it's like so well trained for categorical variables. So that's like what I'm going to say is my first major pick. And then the second one I'll call out is Pomegranate, which is a library for doing sort of like distribution fitting to your data set. And the author of Pomegranate actually was able to show that he got better performance using naive Bayes than scikit-learn's version of support vector machine on some specific problem, because he pre-fit the data to this right distribution and then was able to figure out the like perfect boundary condition, which is just insane because this naive Bayes algorithm is in no way better than support vector machines. So those are my two picks because they're amazing tools and they don't get enough love, anywhere near enough, and you should go use them immediately if you haven't already.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join me and discuss ways that people can get involved with real-world initiatives and organizations that will help them become realized. So I want to thank you for that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I hope you do too. Thank you so much. This was super fun.